Hello, my name is Jameson Choi,
Aiden Hyde,
Blake Mahoney,
Harrison Yu, Hudson Haydo.
and we are going to talk about industrial overfishing. According to Jennifer Silver, PhD, and Joshua Stahl, PhD, both professors on social ecology systems, fishing licenses are central to the fisheries management systems. Their three main purposes are to define and allocate harvest rights, place limits upon authorized harvesters in relation to fishery, and to monitor and enforce the amount of fishing. Even with that, the IUCN reported that in 2012, the UNFAO, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, determined that 70% of the world's fish populations are unsustainably exploited. This shows that there is still a lot of unregulated fishing that goes on illegally. Sylvia Earle, a marine biologist, states that in the last 50 years, we have lost more than 90% of the big fish in the sea, nearly half of the coral reefs have disappeared, and there has been a mysterious depletion of oxygen in large areas of the Pacific. According to World Counts, the current world projection in 2048 is that the world will run out of seafood. Without any critical change for the next 25 years, humans will put an end to the oceans as a food source for the human population. This graph shows the commonly fished areas of the world. The yellow shows an indication of more likely fished areas, which was last reported on the Global Fishing Watch in 2020.
The main problem that our solutions are aimed at addressing is the issue of overfishing. According to the Marine Stewardship Council, overfishing is defined as the removal of fish from their environments at a higher rate than which they can naturally reproduce. This has several large implications. The first of which being that, according to the World Wildlife Fund, overfishing heavily impacts the food webs across the globe. And as stated by Daniel K. Inouye at the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies, this has heavy impacts on many people's food sources, especially in impoverished areas, considering they do not have as many different food sources that they can fall back on. The second major effect that our solution, or that overfishing has, is that according to C.G. Joe Peterson, the value of fish stocks and products fall heavily as an effect of overfishing. This is because the supply of fishing products is much higher than the demand is due to the nature of overfishing. This graph shows which countries are currently overfishing the most, as shown by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United States as of 2020. As you can see, some of the countries that actually have the largest economies are in fact some of the countries that are overfishing the most, with both China and the US being in the top 5.
The first solution our group decided upon was to cut fishing subsidies. Fishing subsidies are payments that the government makes to fishing corporations to help promote fishing and to keep the cost of fishing products low. However, according to Martin D. Smith, a researcher on marine economics, subsidies that lower the cost of fishing can lead to overcapacity, economic loss, and overfishing. Currently, world governments spend about $30.6 billion a year to subsidize the global fishing industry. Fishing subsidies lead to overfishing by providing companies with the means necessary to take large amounts of fish from wide swaths of the ocean. Also, the World Wildlife Fund says that harmful subsidies decrease the long-term productivity of fisheries by leading to an oversized fleet, encouraging overfishing, and threatening jobs in coastal communities. If people wish to cut fishing subsidies on a global scale, the best way to do this would be to pass a resolution through the United Nations or through another global regulatory committee and have that resolution agreed upon by the world's largest fishing nations. Cutting fishing subsidies has its fair share of pros and cons. Some of the pros is that it would stop incentivizing overfishing. Also, without government money to prop up their revenue streams, fishing companies would be forced to focus on more effectively managing their fisheries. Additionally, Ernesto Fernandez-Mong, a fisheries subsidies researcher at Pew Institute, says, ending harmful subsidies can help reduce overfishing and at least begin to reverse some of the damage. Some of the cons, however, is that cutting subsidies could cause a spike in the price of fishing products worldwide, and it would also be difficult to get international agreement on resolutions to cut fishing subsidies.
Our second solution is MPAs, or Marine Protected Areas. Introducing more MPAs into more areas of the ocean can help combat overfishing. According to Julia Cusick from Georgetown University, one of the most powerful and effective methods for protecting fisheries, resources, and ocean life would be marine protected areas. A fully protected MPA allows sea animals to grow more than the marine life outside the protected area, according to the manager for the Energy and Environment Department at American Progress. This graph right here shows a map of the world's oceans. The dark blue circles show the fully implemented MPAs. Lighter blue and the lighter blue areas with lines through them show MPAs that are either not implemented yet or that have been lightly implemented to protect. Some pros and cons for solution number 2, marine protected areas, would be that MPAs help protect important habitats and representative samples of marine life. Another pro is that MPAs prevent overfishing in areas by not allowing people from people to fish in certain areas with endangered fish. Some cons to this solution include, according to Timothy D. White from the University of California, Berkeley, is that MPAs cause uncertainty over nations' ability to enforce fishing bans across vast remote regions. Also, that MPAs would be difficult to enforce due to the fact that not one nation has control over all of the oceans.
In conclusion, overfishing is a massive problem that creates imbalances in the food web and decreases the value of fish stocks. In response to this problem, we have identified 2 solutions. The first is cutting fishing subsidies, and the second is creating more marine protected areas. Both solutions have pros and cons. The first solution, cutting fishing subsidies, would stop rewarding overfishing and force companies to focus on fishery management. But it could also lead to a loss of jobs and shortage of fish products. The second solution, creating more marine protected areas, would protect important habitats and representative samples of marine life and prevent overfishing by not allowing people to fish in certain areas. But it could also lead to an uncertainty over nations' abilities to enforce bans over certain regions. Although both solutions have pros and cons, we have identified the first solution, cutting fishing subsidies, as the better solution because it takes away financial incentives for companies to overfish and forces companies to enforce better fishery management to save profits. Therefore, cutting fishing subsidies would be a viable option for combating overfishing, and society would see positive steps towards eliminating overfishing if this solution was implemented. Thank you for your time.
Terrific, thanks guys. I got a few questions for you. So again, the way you're standing, student 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So that's how I'll refer to you. And let's go backwards. We'll start with student 5, okay? Describe an argument from one of your peers, so any one of those 4 guys, individual reports, that made you think differently about the solution that you guys ultimately picked. So did any one of them here help to inform that decision?
Okay, so we decided that solution 1 would be the most viable solution to prevent overfishing, and that was Blake's. That's what he did research on, and he had an economic lens, and he talked about fishing subsidies, and it kind of helped me to realize that that fishermen are being paid by the government to fish, and if we cut down on that, then more fish would be able to be more fish would be alive and more endangered fish would be available because less fish are getting killed due to the fact that fishermen are being paid less or if not any money to fish.
Okay, good. Cool, well let's go backwards. Student 4, what's an example of a compelling argument from any of these guys' IRRs that got excluded completely from your presentation, and how come? How come that wasn't included?
So Hudson wrote about the effect that overfishing has on food scarcity in the world. And while that was a very interesting topic that we all agree on, it didn't really, it didn't fit in with what we were discussing in our presentation, which was sort of, we were talking about how to solve overfishing and talking about something such as talking about all the different effects of it, which there's a long list of them, would be too tangential to our main topic. And so that's why we excluded his report.
Okay, terrific, good. Okay, so down to student 3. Student 3, how did the group decide to include or exclude student 1's perspective, like their IRR, what that had to say, What part of the presentation was that part of, or if it wasn't, why?
So Aiden talked about in his IRR, he had a futuristic lens which talked about fisheries and aquaculture and how they increase sustainability. Even though that might have been related to one of these methods, it didn't really solve anything. His more talked about like our problem was talking about how it creates imbalances in the food web, and our solution talked about cutting taxpayers' money, and he talked about MPAs. So Aiden talked about how they increase sustainability. That could further an argument of our problem, but that doesn't really help generalize our solution in creating a more effective, into a more effective solution in which we can stop this overfishing problem.
Perfect, thanks. So let's see, student 2, I guess we're up to you. Reflecting on your colleagues' work, which one had the greatest impact on your understanding of your own perspective? Like, if you had to identify one of these guys that helped you understand your IRR better, whose would it be and why?
So my lens was social, and I talked about, like Blake said earlier, about how food scarcity and overfishing are deeply related. And Blake actually helped me understand this more, because he talked about the monies behind this overfishing, how fishermen are being paid to go out and overfish, and how this is affecting this food scarcity, which I did not mention in my actual IRR. So he added that idea to it, that the food scarcity is caused by the government paying these subsidies to fishermen who are going out and overfishing.
Perfect, thanks. And then finally, student 1. Student 1, if you guys had another team member, suppose you were a group of 6, right? What additional perspective do you think would have helped to add complexity to the way you analyze the problem or provided solutions?
If I had to pick one more lens or perspective that we could add to our presentation, I would pick the political lens, because I think then we could use that lens to kind of further delve into how these solutions could be implemented and not just the fact that they need to be implemented. For example, with Harrison's solution about marine protected areas, I think we could, the political lens would be a very viable way to discuss how these marine protected areas could be implemented on sort of international oceans and how that would affect current world governments as it is. I think that would be a very compelling argument that could be made.
Okay, terrific. Hey, thanks guys, you're done.